A teenage girl was home alone on a stormy night. As the rain pounded against the windows and the wind howled, she tried to focus on her book to ignore the eerie creaks of the empty house. Suddenly, she heard soft footsteps upstairs. But she knew she was supposed to be alone. Gathering her courage, she whispered, "Hello." No answer, just the sound of footsteps growing louder, heading toward the staircase. Her phone buzzed. A message appeared from an unknown number: "Why are you in my house?" The footsteps stopped just outside her door. Her breath hitched as the doorknob rattled, slow and deliberate, as if testing her fear. She backed away, clutching her phone, her heart pounding in her chest. The message buzzed again: "I see you." She looked around for a weapon, grabbing a heavy lamp. The lights flickered, and the room plunged into darkness. Her trembling hands fumbled for her phone's flashlight, but when she turned it on, she gasped. Standing in the corner of the room was a pale figure, its face obscured by a curtain of matted hair. It pointed at her, and in a voice like wind through broken glass, it whispered, "Get out before it's too late." The girl bolted toward the door, but it slammed shut on its own. Her screams echoed in the silent house as the figure glided closer, its empty eyes gleaming in the faint light. The next morning, the house was quiet. The girl was gone. The only sign she had ever been there was her phone, lying on the floor with one final, unread message: "You should have listened." The room was eerily still as the ghost's chilling whisper faded. The girl pressed herself against the wall, her lamp slipping from her grip. The cold air wrapped around her like icy hands, and she could feel her own breath fogging in the unnatural chill. Suddenly, her phone buzzed again, its glow illuminating the room in brief, sharp flashes. Another message: "Check the mirror." Her stomach churned as she turned her head toward the large mirror across the room. At first, it reflected nothing but her own terrified face. But then, slowly, another figure began to materialize behind her, a shadowy shape with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. The figure raised a hand and reached toward her reflection. But when she turned around, the room was empty. The mirror began to crack, lines spidering out from the center. Her own reflection started to distort, its eyes darkening and its mouth twisting into a silent scream. The cracks grew louder until the glass shattered, spraying shards across the floor. The ghost's voice was everywhere now, whispering from every shadow, every corner: "You stayed too long. Now you belong to me." The girl tried to scream, but her voice was swallowed by the silence. The walls around her began to shift, the once familiar house warping into a dark, endless corridor. She ran, but the hallway stretched on forever, doors slamming shut as she passed. Behind her, the ghost's laughter echoed, growing louder and louder. She could feel its presence closing in, the air heavy with despair. Her vision blurred as the world around her faded to black. Days later, the neighbors called the police, reporting that the girl hadn't been seen. When officers entered the house, they found nothing but her phone lying on the floor, its screen frozen on a single, haunting message: "You're home now." The house has remained empty ever since, except for those who claim to hear soft footsteps and a girl's faint screams at night. Weeks passed, but whispers about the house grew louder in the neighborhood. People spoke of flickering lights in the windows, shadows moving when no one was there, and the faint sound of a girl crying in the dead of night. Despite these eerie tales, one brave investigator, a local paranormal enthusiast named Ethan, decided to explore the mystery. Armed with a flashlight, a voice recorder, and a camera, Ethan entered the house. The air inside was thick and cold, carrying the smell of damp wood and something faintly metallic like blood. He called out softly, "Is anyone here?" The silence was deafening at first, but as he moved further in, faint whispers began to echo. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was pleading, desperate. In the living room, he found the shattered mirror. Among the shards on the floor lay the girl's phone, its screen now dark. He bent down to pick it up when suddenly, the air around him grew icy, and the phone buzzed to life in his hand. The screen displayed a single message, "Help me." Ethan's heart raced as he whispered, "Who are you? What happened?" He placed the phone on a nearby table and started recording, hoping for an EVP. The whispers grew louder. This time, they formed words, "She wouldn't leave. Now she's trapped. Like the others." He spun around, shining his flashlight into the shadows. For a moment, he thought he saw the faint outline of a girl standing at the base of the stairs, her head bowed, her long hair covering her face. "Are you the girl?" he asked, his voice shaking. The figure slowly lifted its head. Her hollow eyes met his, and her mouth opened unnaturally wide, releasing a scream that wasn't human. The flashlight flickered violently, and the house seemed to tremble as the sound echoed. The front door slammed shut behind him. The walls began to close in, their surfaces warping and bleeding black liquid. Ethan stumbled back, dropping his camera as the girl's voice filled his ears, "You shouldn't have come. Now you'll stay too." The staircase creaked as shadowy figures emerged, their faces twisted and unrecognizable. They reached out to him, their hands cold and clammy as they dragged him deeper into the house. He screamed, but his cries were swallowed by the darkness. The next day, Ethan's friends came looking for him. His car was parked outside, but the house was silent. Inside, they found his flashlight and camera, both broken. His voice recorder held only static except for one faint whisper beneath the noise, "Run." To this day, no one who enters the house has ever come back. Locals say the house is alive, feeding on those who dare disturb its haunted halls. And late at night, if you stand outside, you can hear them, the girl, Ethan, and all the others, their voices blending into one endless, mournful cry, "Help us." More. ChatGPT said, ChatGPT. Years passed, and the house earned a sinister reputation. Locals called it the Whispering House, warning strangers never to step inside. But for some, the lure of its dark mystery was irresistible. A group of college friends, eager for a thrill, decided to investigate the house on Halloween night. Armed with flashlights and bravado, they ignored the warnings and ventured inside, laughing off the stories. The moment they crossed the threshold, the door creaked shut behind them. One of them, Mia, joked, "Looks like we're locked in now." Spooky. But her laughter faded when the air grew unnaturally cold. The living room was dim, the faint outlines of furniture covered in dust. In the corner, Mia spotted a shattered mirror. She bent down to examine it, noticing something written on the largest shard in what looked like dried blood, "Leave while you can." "Guys, check this out," she said nervously, but her friends were already exploring the hallway. She followed, her unease growing as she noticed the faint smell of rot. In the hallway, their flashlights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the peeling wallpaper. One of them, Sam, found an old photo frame on the floor. It showed a family: a smiling father, mother, and a young girl. But as Sam stared, the faces in the picture began to blur, their smiles twisting into anguished expressions. "Did you see that?" Sam whispered, his voice trembling. "What are you talking about?" asked Liam, another friend, but before Sam could respond, a loud bang came from upstairs. "Maybe it's just the wind," Liam said, trying to sound confident. "Wind doesn't make footsteps," Mia whispered, her flashlight pointing toward the staircase. The sound of creaking wood echoed above them, as if someone or something was pacing. Against their better judgment, they climbed the stairs, drawn by a mixture of fear and curiosity. At the top of the stairs, they found a door slightly ajar. Pushing it open, they entered a child's bedroom. The walls were covered in faded pink wallpaper, and a single doll sat in the middle of the room. Its head was tilted, its glassy eyes staring directly at them. "Creepy," Mia muttered, stepping closer. But as she did, the doll's head snapped to the side, its lips parting in a hollow, raspy voice. "Why did you come here?" Mia screamed and stumbled back, and the room seemed to shift around them. The wallpaper peeled away, revealing dark, pulsing veins beneath. The doll's voice grew louder, joined by other whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The friends tried to run, but the hallway stretched endlessly before them, twisting and turning in impossible ways. The doors they passed slammed shut, one after another, until they were trapped in a single, windowless room. "What's happening?" Liam shouted, pounding on the walls. The whispers grew deafening, forming words. "You're ours now. Just like the others." The floor beneath them began to rot, dark tendrils creeping upward and wrapping around their legs. They struggled, but the more they fought, the tighter the house's grip became. The last thing Mia saw before the darkness consumed her was the girl from the photograph standing in the corner, her eyes empty and her face twisted in sorrow. The girl raised a finger to her lips and whispered, "Shh, it's over." By morning, the house was silent once more. The college friends were never seen again, but locals claimed to hear new voices in the nightly whispers. If you stand close enough to the house on a quiet night, you might hear their cries. Decades later, the house stood abandoned, draped in vines and cloaked in shadow. The townspeople avoided it, their warnings growing into hushed folklore. Some said the house chose its victims, calling to those who couldn't resist its dark allure. But one cold autumn evening, a woman named Claire arrived in town. She was a writer, fascinated by tales of the supernatural, and had heard of the Whispering House from an old journal. Determined to uncover the truth, she ignored the locals' desperate warnings and approached the house with her camera, a notebook, and an unsettling mixture of excitement and dread. As Claire stepped inside, the heavy door groaned shut behind her. She paused, feeling a chill crawl up her spine. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the faint smell of decay. Her flashlight illuminated the dusty floorboards, but her attention was drawn to the faint sound of humming. It was soft, almost melodic, coming from somewhere deep within the house. Claire followed the sound, her steps careful as she moved through the dimly lit halls. She found herself in the living room, where a shattered mirror hung crookedly on the wall. Her reflection seemed off, its movements lagged, her expression a little too solemn. She turned away quickly, her flashlight flickering as the humming grew louder. It led her to the staircase, where faint, childlike laughter echoed. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. There was no reply, only the creak of a floorboard above her. She hesitated, but her curiosity outweighed her fear. Climbing the stairs, she noticed the photographs on the wall. They depicted families who had once lived in the house, but as she passed, the faces in the pictures seemed to follow her. At the top of the stairs, a door slammed shut, startling her. It was the room at the end of the hall, its wooden surface scratched as though something had clawed at it. Gathering her courage, Claire pushed it open. Inside, she found a nursery. A small bed sat in the corner, its blanket neatly folded. A dollhouse rested on the floor, its tiny windows dark. Room at the end of the hall, its wooden surface scratched as though something had clawed at it. Gathering her courage, Claire pushed it open. Inside, she found a nursery. A small bed sat in the corner, its blanket neatly folded. A dollhouse rested on the floor, its tiny windows dark. But what caught her attention was a child's diary lying on the desk. The pages were yellowed, but the writing was still legible. It began innocently enough: "Today I played outside. The sun was warm." But as she flipped through the entries, the tone shifted. "Something is in my room at night. It whispers to me. Mommy doesn't believe me, but it says I belong to it. The house is alive. It won't let me leave." Claire froze as the final entry bled into the page, written in shaky, desperate letters: "It's coming for me. I hear it now." The room grew colder, and the sound of soft footsteps approached from behind. Claire turned, but the hallway was empty. Her flashlight flickered again, and for a moment, she thought she saw shadows moving at the edge of the light. A voice, small, trembling, whispered in her ear, "Why did you come? You'll never leave." Panicked, Claire ran back down the hall, but the staircase was gone, replaced by a solid wall. The house groaned as if it were alive, the walls warping and closing in. Suddenly, the child's laughter returned, louder now, but it was mixed with screams, hundreds of voices crying out in despair. She turned to see the girl from the diary standing in the hall, her eyes hollow, her mouth sewn shut with dark threads. Claire tried to scream, but her voice was stolen by the cold air. The girl raised her hand, pointing behind Claire. She turned to see the walls splitting open, revealing dozens of faces pressed against the surface, their mouths open in silent agony. The house began to consume her, pulling her into its shadows as the voices grew deafening. Claire's camera hit the floor, snapping a single, distorted photo before the room went dark. The next day, locals found her car parked outside, but no one dared enter the house. Months later, the photo from her camera surfaced online, showing the blurry image of Claire surrounded by countless ghostly faces. The caption beneath the photo read, "The house doesn't let go. It only waits for more." Years passed, and the whispering house became the subject of urban legends, drawing only the bravest or most foolish daredevils to its doors. But the house never failed to silence those who entered. It waited patiently, as if it knew the right soul would eventually come. One such soul was Daniel, a skeptic and amateur paranormal investigator. He had heard about the house through forums and saw it as the perfect opportunity to debunk the local ghost stories. Armed with high-tech gear, a thermal camera, motion sensors, and an audio recorder, Daniel was confident he'd find nothing but creaky floorboards and overactive imaginations. The moment he stepped inside, his cocky demeanor faltered. The air felt wrong, oppressive, heavy, as if the house itself was watching him. Shaking off the unease, Daniel set up his equipment, placing motion detectors in the hallway and his camera in the living room. "All right, show me what you've got," he muttered, switching on his recorder. At first, nothing happened. Hours passed in silence, and Daniel began to relax, convinced the house was nothing more than an old, abandoned structure. But then, just as he prepared to pack up, the motion detector in the hallway went off. A chill ran down his spine as he checked the live feed from his camera. On the screen, he saw a faint, human-like shape standing at the base of the stairs. Its edges shimmered, almost transparent, but its hollow eyes were unmistakable. Daniel froze. "No way," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The figure moved, stepping out of view. He grabbed his flashlight and rushed to the hallway, but it was empty. The motion detector beeped again, this time from upstairs. "Okay, this is insane," he said, his bravado cracking. But curiosity and pride pushed him forward. The stairs groaned beneath his weight as he climbed. At the top, the air felt colder, each breath visible in the dim light. The hallway stretched impossibly long, doors lining both sides, each one slightly ajar. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing unnaturally. A door at the far end creaked open wider, revealing darkness within. His thermal camera picked up no heat signatures, nothing alive, but he could feel something watching him. He entered the room slowly, his flashlight trembling in his hand. Inside was a study, its walls lined with books and faded portraits. A single chair sat in the center, facing an old desk covered in dust. On the desk lay an object that didn't belong, a modern photograph. Daniel picked it up, his heart racing. It was a picture of him, standing at the front door of the house, taken just hours ago. The whispers started then, faint at first but growing louder, surrounding him. "Why are you here? You shouldn't have come." The door slammed shut behind him. He spun around, but the room had changed. The desk and bookshelves were gone, replaced by rotting walls that seemed to pulse and breathe. Shadows crawled across the floor, twisting and writhing like living things. The whispers grew into screams, overlapping voices crying out in pain and anger. The walls began to bleed, dark streaks oozing down as the room seemed to collapse inward. Desperate, Daniel clawed at the door, but it wouldn't budge. His camera feed crackled, the screen showing static before revealing a horrifying sight: his own face, twisted and screaming, staring back at him. A voice, deep and guttural, echoed through the room, "You wanted proof. Now you're part of it." The floor opened beneath him, a black void swallowing him whole. As he fell, the screams grew deafening, merging into a single, inhuman wail. Daniel's equipment was found outside the house the next morning, perfectly arranged on the porch. His thermal camera contained one final image, a blurry shot of him standing in the upstairs hallway, his face pale and his eyes hollow. No one knows what truly happened to Daniel, but those who pass the house now swear they see his shadow in the upstairs window, watching, waiting. And if you listen closely on a quiet night, you can hear his voice join the chorus of whispers, repeating the same haunting phrase, "I shouldn't have come." Months after Daniel's disappearance, the house remained shrouded in dread. Despite its growing legend, one person couldn't stay away: Olivia, Daniel's younger sister. She refused to believe the stories and was determined to uncover the truth about her brother's fate. Olivia wasn't afraid of ghosts, or so she told herself. Armed with a flashlight, a backpack of supplies, and Daniel's journal of notes, she stepped into the house under the fading evening light. The air inside felt suffocating, as though the house resented her presence. She glanced around the dark foyer, her footsteps echoing louder than they should have. "Daniel," she called softly. "I'm here. I'm going to find you." Her flashlight beam swept across the dusty floor and up to the walls, where faint handprints, too small to belong to an adult, seemed to trail toward the staircase. She hesitated but followed, her heart pounding louder with each creak of the old wood. At the top of the stairs, she spotted a door slightly ajar. From inside came a faint sound of voice, low and distorted, but unmistakably Daniel's. "Liv, help me." She froze. "Daniel, is that you?" The voice didn't respond, but a shadow passed behind the door. Gathering her courage, Olivia pushed it open and found herself in a room that defied logic. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, showing faces both young and old. Some were smiling, but most wore expressions of fear. In the center of the room stood a single chair, and on it sat a familiar object, Daniel's backpack. "Daniel," she whispered, stepping closer. As she reached for the bag, the door slammed shut behind her, and the photographs began to shift. The faces twisted, mouths opening wide in silent screams. "Leave now, Liv." Daniel's voice yelled, but this time it came from everywhere. The floor beneath her rippled like water, and the walls began to bleed a thick, black substance. She stumbled back, her flashlight flickering wildly, when she saw him, Daniel, standing in the corner, his eyes hollow, his skin pale as ash. "Daniel!" she cried, rushing toward him. "No!" he shouted, holding up a hand to stop her. "It's not me anymore. It's the house. You have to go before it takes you to. I'm not leaving without you." His expression twisted with pain as the black ooze from the walls began to seep toward him, pulling at his legs. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cracking. "It feeds on us. If you stay, you'll never leave." The whispers returned then, louder than ever, overlapping voices urging her to stay, to join them. She backed away, her eyes darting around the room for an escape. Suddenly, Daniel screamed, his voice merging with the whispers as his body contorted, dissolving into the shadows. The walls around her shifted, closing in, and the photographs began to peel away, revealing countless hollow eyes staring from within. Olivia ran, her breath ragged as she tore down the hallway. The stairs had vanished, replaced by a black void stretching endlessly below. Desperate, she threw herself toward the door she had entered through, now barely visible in the distance. Just as she reached it, an icy hand grabbed her wrist. She turned to see a young girl, her face streaked with tears and her mouth sewn shut. The girl's grip tightened, pulling Olivia back toward the darkness. "No!" Olivia screamed, wrenching free and stumbling through the door. She tumbled onto the porch, gasping for air. When she turned back, the house was silent, its windows dark and empty. But just as she thought she was safe, she heard a whisper, Daniel's voice faint but clear, "I told you to leave." Olivia never spoke of what happened that night, but she was never the same. Some say she escaped the house, but not its curse. Others claim she still returns, standing outside its gates, hoping to hear her brother's voice again. And those who pass by late at night swear they see her shadow standing beside his in the upstairs window, both of them trapped by the house, waiting for the next soul to wander inside. The end.